And we are live. R. Ronnie Virdi is joining me today. Ro is traveling, so he will not be here. Ronnie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am living the dream, as always. If you're on this show, you must have a book. Tell us about your book or books.
Yeah. So most recently, I had the first binding come out, and then 2 weeks from the date we're recording this, at least, the Doors of Midnight, the sequel to that, will be coming out August 13th. And the series is about a wandering storyteller in the present who you realize is sort of the greatest villain or the greatest hero out of legends in this world. And his legends have sort of been co-opted and adopted by other cultures along my fictional Silk Road. So everyone has their spin off his like life, and they've all co-opted it because that's something that's happened in real mythology. Something I pursue and I'm starting to teach a little bit is comparative mythology, and how there's so many comparative stories of legendary heroes, beats, which people might be familiar with. The idea of the hero's journey, which is a codification and a reduction of that journey. Like people have only taken the most popular beats, but there's so much more. While we're doing this book tour, I've been writing essays for different um, articles and listicles of things like five famous myths that people don't know of. Lovers Lost. Everyone might have heard of Orpheus and Eurydice, but they don't know there's five other versions, nearly identical in other cultures. And my series is sort of tackling that and detangling or decolonizing, if you will, by showing legendary beats from either modern fiction and classical as well as mythology, but through an Asian lens along a fictional Silk Road.
Awesome. So it has always been a goal of mine. I'd love to visit like the old cities of the Silk Road. So this just sounds right up my alley. A little bit we talked about before. Yeah, I'm going to have to break. Is Tim okay? No, Tim is not here. I might have to break my rule and read a book that's over 500 pages. Can't tell Tim McKay that because I'll never hear the end of it. But anyway, we have Timothy Wolf is here. We have Juliana, awesome. We have John Stevenson, and we have no Roe because he is traveling today. So, Ronnie, when did the first book come out?
The first book came out August 16th or 18th, 2022. So book two is just coming out now. Yeah, there's a 2 year gap. Unfortunately, my first editor was let go 6 months or 8 months after I turned in book two, which is what's responsible for the delay. Me and a few other authors, unfortunately, just didn't get our edits. We had no idea what was going on, and then we just got a new editor at some point.
Okay. So we always hear horror stories about traditionally published authors, which you are, which we don't actually interview a ton here, but how long is the process between you finishing your book and it getting published? Because we're always told it's 2 years. And I just wonder, is that true?
That sounds about right. Yeah, there's a lot of lead time, and I'm thinking, from what I understand, post COVID, there's a lot of paper sourcing now that they have to be like previously apprised for because there's been a paper shortage in the industry. I come primarily from India. I was actually an indie author for much longer, so adjusting the traditional has been hard for how long it takes to get a book out once it's done for me. I'm much more used to. I have my freelancer, like dev, edit, copy, and that whole people. They're lined up way early in advance. I know when I'm going to finish because I know my writing speed. I can get the book out by X date, barring accidents. I know that happens. Like if I had issues where cover artist gets sick, family emergency. That's always fine, right? Well, but traditional has been very different for me to adjust to in terms of lead time. 2 years sounds about right. I had turned in the first binding 2021, and it came out 2022. So that's 1 year. But the Doors of Midnight, I turned in the original draft July 14th. I remember because I was on a working vacation, and it was a month before book one was even out. I turned it in early, and it's coming out now August. So, 2 years later, yeah.
So, Julianne, I'm going to have to apologize. I forget the store that you work
Indigo,
for.
right?
Yes, Indigo. Yes, the Barnes and Nobles of Canada. And she said they just got.
I actually owe her a shipment. Yeah, I was going to send her book plates, little signed autographs. Oops.
Yep. Well,
wait, they're not out on shelves yet, so never mind.
Let's see. And then Daniel says 2 years is an unreasonable wait time for those of us who want the book now.
Yeah. It also delays, unfortunately, the writing of it, which people don't understand because of the contract stuff. There was a lot of back and forth in the editing for cutting the book because the book was much larger than book one. that was the principal thing, how much it would cost. So that delayed me writing book 3 because there were certain arcs I had already committed to in book 3, and they were like, well, we're going to cut these chapters and these arcs because we just don't want to publish a book that's 450,000 words. That was the original draft. It's coming out at 385, so it lost about 70,000 words, which is arguably a novel's worth. It is. I'm still happy with the book. Like I don't regret anything. I'm very happy with the final product. All the early hype has been great. All the peer reviews have been wonderful. It's just, it does change, obviously. Like if I'm going to have an arc that I'm going to write in book 3 and build off of, but now that arc is all gone, I have to redraft how I'm going to tackle book 3.
Yeah. So 450,000 words.
Well, it's the original draft. Yeah. The final's 385, so it's not that much longer than book 1. It's like a novella's worth. Book 1 was 351K. It was published at, so another 34,000. So yeah, it's like an extra novella's worth.
Okay, I'm just thinking. I've published 5 books now, and I counted. I had 468,000 words published over 5 books, and you nearly met that in one. So yeah.
In my defense, it's not. I do write across lengths, so like I don't only write chunky books. My back history has been predominantly urban fantasy, which is like a tighter, smaller genre. So
right.
Indie, most of those books are like 90 to 120. And I've written a 66,000 word book and short stories and novellas. So I publish at like every length. I don't just write like Chihuahua killers.
Not just doorstops. Nice.
Yeah.
So where did you get the idea for this series?
It was a culmination of a few things. One of the things that always resonated with me, and it was from the Marco Polo show, and something that I read of his where he has a famous quote, which is, "I did not tell half of what I see or what I saw, for I knew I would not be believed." And I thought that's such a cool line. His own accountings are already kind of like ridiculous. There's a lot of hyperbole in there. And he saw the court of Kublai Khan right after and during Kublai's conquest of China, unifying it after taking down after besting the wall and creating the Yuan dynasty. So I'm like, what did this guy see at that time that was so wild when he's already accounted wild things that people couldn't believe? And there's this history of storytellers going across the world doing similar. And growing up, like I said, I'm a huge comparative mythology fan. I started realizing there are so many things, particularly in Western fantasy and mythology, that people don't realize have analogs or counterparts, and sometimes older stories from Eastern and Asian mythology. Yeah. And I wanted to sort of write a character who, by the sheer nature of his trade, could detangle or decolonize that, and also show that through a really cool lens. And the frame narrative comes from South Asia. So this is kind of like a PhD for me to sort of, I guess, write a love letter to everything I like about fantasy, while also showing other breadth of where it comes from and educating and diversifying. It's like a huge just love letter passion project for me. The actual character came from a standalone novel that was going to do the same thing. Originally, I had one book where the storyteller was going to be a side character in. And as I started fleshing him out, he sort of, like a storyteller, took over the whole show. And I moved to starting this project. And I didn't think it would end up where it did. Because when we started it, it was originally going to be, with my artist and I, a serialized picaresque like on Patreon. It was going to be episodically a vignette. And at the time, Tantor and Audible specifically were interested in it because it sounded like a great audiobook project for them. Like very lyrical, very beautiful and performative. And it ended up in the hands of Tor off the sample. And then it just kind of, some ways, took it out of my hands. It was like, do you want to do this or not? And we can afford to, publish a book this big. Because at the time, I didn't know how I would get this done at 350,000 words, like out and sold and distributed, even indie. It felt like it was too big at the time when I started. It was 2018 to 2019.
So do you ever feel like you have to put your characters on as co-authors when you write these things? Because they tend to take a life of their own, and they're like, no, we'll tell you the story. You just write it down.
Yeah, in this series most particularly, yes, because a lot of it, like I said, is drawn on actual mythology, and there's so much rattling in the back of my brain that a lot of the nesting stories and directions originally that I wanted to take it weren't what I ended up doing. I found other ways to tie it back to what my sort of, I guess, thesis would be, of still detangling and showing the homophily and similarities between contemporary fiction, mythology, and then everything in between. But the way I got there with how Ari performs certain stories, originally I had more regimented certain ones I wanted to do, some that were more fictional, and he ended up doing retellings of some real inspired ones. And there was, I guess, argument in my head of like, well, why don't I do this? Because it only makes my point better if I use actual comparative mythology and inspiration from it, and even the nesting stories, not just the modern day beats, not just the story beats removed from that, but I make him perform stories that have some analog to other cultural nods, because it sort of makes the book more meta. But that wasn't originally the intent within the nesting stories. I was going to have completely 100% only fictional pieces within that world. They still are fictional, but they draw from a lot of actual mythology now, and specifically comparative mythology stories that show up in other cultures. So people can sort of get an idea of, I think it's this myth, but if you're from a different culture, you'll know it by a different myth than what someone in the West might. But that wasn't originally 100% in the design.
Yep. So you made me think of something, and I want to pitch this to you as your next series that you write. I read an article, oh hell, I don't know, last century, that long ago, but it said that I think it was the phoenix got its beginning because there were dinosaur bones somewhere in Persia, and they didn't know what it was, and they said, well, this is, and so they came up with a story to describe the bones because no one had ever seen, a triceratops before or whatever. And they said, and that they went on to say that most of like the dragons, phoenix, griffins, all that probably came from just seeing dinosaur bones and having to explain what's that. And no one had seen a dinosaur before at that time, so they came with all these mythical beasts. So I think you should look into that and write a series, because I would love to read that, but I don't want to research it.
That's fair enough. There's a lot of interesting stuff about, like, particularly dragon mythology, because I don't know what spurred it, but it is one of the oldest myths.
Yeah.
The Proto-Indo-Europeans, like, their culture permeated a lot through obviously Asia and Eurasia, the Baltic and Slavic area, South Asia. And there seems to be one of the most popular motifs, which is one I discuss or tackle through the series, the idea of the dragon slayer. And the original dragons weren't winged European dragons with wings. The oldest dragons that were identified still as dragons were aquatic serpents, but they weren't just called sea snakes. One is from South Asian mythology called Vitra, who is Masura, which is sort of, you can say demon, but these are celestial. They're more powerful than that. They would almost be like a contemporary would be, a god, but that term isn't enough. These are celestial beings of cosmological like power, and one they can shapeshift. And Vitra actually takes the form of a three-headed dragon, and he holds all the waters of the world hostage. His story is very analogous to Jormungandr from Norse mythology and Thor, their battle, because Indra, a storm god from South Asian mythology, kills him. But interestingly enough, he is identified as a dragon. In the actual old text, for killing him, Indra earns the epithet, the slayer of the firstborn of dragons. So interestingly enough, the further we go back, it does seem like our dragons were actually giant sea serpents, and we did consider them dragons. And interestingly enough, in Tolkien, for anyone who watches this and is interested, Tolkien's first dragon was not a winged dragon. Glaurung was called like the great serpent, but he was also a dragon, and he was also called a worm. And he didn't breathe fire; he breathed poison, which interestingly enough also is in the Norse legends and other ancient serpents. The original dragons weren't fire breathing; they were poisonous. And I think that might have to do with sea snakes. That's just a guess. I'm not actually sure, or just maybe derived from serpents being venomous in the first place. At least the dangerous ones. But it is fascinating. The history of dragons themselves are so ancient and predate everything. Like they are one of the original archetypal monsters.
Yep. See, you definitely are the person to write this series. You need to, after you finish this series here, you need to start with how did all the mythic creatures come about? That's all I want. Just 1.5 million words.
There's some fascinating stuff there. Like, so the griffin is actually an Indian monster, but it was created by the Greeks. And this is something I do sort of tackle in Tales of Tremaine, of how storytelling evolves and cultures create some monsters. And the Greeks thought this because there was Indo-Roman, Parthian, and Greek trade. But this is like a rumor they just started. Like, oh, there are these griffins, there are these winged creatures, but they live in India, this exotic land. The predecessor in mythology to what I suppose you would consider the dune worm, Shavalid, was the Indus Valley river worm. And the Greeks also believed there's this massive, like, dune-like worm that just lived in India that, like, spit poison, was the size of mountains, and it carved these mountain valleys. But what's funny is it's considered an Indian monster, but the Indians never created it. It was another culture's myth that they created about a far-off land. And that has historically happened, interestingly enough, with storytelling. The Persians actually created a story which has archetypally been really important to the history of storytelling. Zadig, which is a story, was inspired by what's called the Three Princes of Serendip, which is a story about Sri Lanka by its old name Serendip, created by the Persians, and it's the first idea of a serendipity story, which is just a story of fun. You have three princes who are wealthy and they go on an adventure. It's a travelogue, and fun shenanigans just happen to them. There isn't a traditional climax. But what's interesting is it's a Sri Lankan story, but another culture created it as a story about them.
So I have to ask, is your heritage, is that Indian, Sri Lankan from that area?
Most predominantly Indian. There's some like European in there, like ages ago when the Europeans came to visit and obviously did what they do, which is they left their DNA after they sampled some of the local spices.
Right.
But yeah, predominantly Indian, yeah.
I am just awestruck by your knowledge of all the different mythologies. So
yeah. Well, that is like what I love to study. That's my passion and where this came from. Yeah, someone just said cultural appropriation is the oldest game. If you're interested in this, a simple Google search, which might blow people's minds, is Google similarities between the Iliad, Odyssey, and then Raman or Ramayana in English, and Mahabharata, which are the South Asian epics. There are so many near identical perfect beats, especially between two of the important characters, Achilles and Karan, who die in similar ways. The nature of their wars are very similar. The kidnapping of a princess, a lot of the archetypal structural things that lead up to the war and what happened during it. There are so many homophilic similar beats that there's theories either, obviously these two cultures traded, so that could have influenced the stories because they had older oral traditions than they have written. And then there's also the argument that they could be taking from older proto-cultures that inspired them. In this case, Proto-Indo-European.
So I have to stop you because Kay is here, and we all have to wave to Kay because she is just awesome.
Hi.
So yeah, that is actually I'll have to do that search because again I need you to do this next series for me. But after you, even with now that I know that Tim McKay is here, I'm going to say it again. I'm probably going to read your book, even though it's 800 pages. And Tim, don't come at me. It's right up my alley. Comparative mythologies. How can I not? I have read actual more professional articles on mythology just because I'm weird and do that. So I would much rather have it in a fantasy book and just, have a plot with my. So you said you're writing the third book now?
Yeah.
Do you have a date for when you think you'll be done with that? Assuming
if life cooperates, hopefully early spring next year, which will be perfectly in time for our 2026 release in summer, which is now what I'm on, given the delays that happened in publishing. As you know, we personally discussed today, I almost canceled the interview because my main writing computer went kaput today. I'm literally doing this on my phone. That was like the worst time because I've been drafting book 3 in notes and by hand, and I'm officially supposed to start tomorrow. So I have to actually write on a tiny laptop, which is not built for writing because ADHD, I compartmentalize stuff. I have an actual writing desk where if I sit, it's really easy for the brain to go, you sit here, you're working. This is a workspace. Everything else goes off. It just makes it easier to get in the flow state as somebody with ADHD who's prone to distraction. Because when I do that, I can write a lot. Like I can do 6,000 words in a day on a project.
Oh, wow.
It's just, I need to I get to do this full time right now. That might also change depending on all the delays and what's going on with publishing. But hopefully, as long as I can eke it out, at least to wrap up book 3.
So how many books have you published?
That's a good question. I know that my name, I don't know the number. Like, give me a sec. I'm going to count like a Neanderthal on my fingers, but I might mouth the titles like quietly. Steve Shepherd. Not counting this series, 10. And then the first binding makes 11. Doors of Midnight makes 12. I have a thriller, which I'm hoping sells. It's currently on submission. That'll be 13. And then book 3, which I'm going to get done hopefully by spring, will be 14. Yeah. Wow. I failed math. I'm the world's worst Asian. I failed science and I failed math. I'm literally like a beige redneck. I grew up in a neighborhood of muscle cars and hot rodding and restoring them and stuff like that. So
that's why you had to come to the U.S., huh?
Uh-huh.
That's why you had to come to the U.S. It's like not good at math or science, out of Asia.
No, I was born here. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So you wrote how many of the? I know you said you wrote a bunch of urban fantasy.
Hmm?
Started off indie.
Hmm?
How many of those did you write? And was it a series?
Yeah, there's two series. They're both ongoing. I had to unfortunately slow down because when I was writing book four is when I sold the contract for Tremaine, which, given the size of the books and legal contract, I had to prioritize this series. But I have four technically in my main series, The Grave Report. I have three main novels, one standalone, which is an in between and a reader magnet. I'm working on book four very slowly on the side. Book four is like 50,000 words in. I have one what I called epic urban fantasy because it's more contemporary, less set to just a city state. That's about 181,000 words. The book's a winner. And then I have a space western I wrote specifically for a friend. I've always been a huge proponent of the indie movement and the independence there. One of my friends, who's a wonderful editor, started her own small publishing company, and she was a sci-fi fan especially. So I wrote specifically for her a space western because I also wanted to play with language, and I love Southern American dialect. I love different bits of slang. I think it's actually beautiful, the diversity of just different accents and dialects we have in America that I don't think get enough credit because we get a lot of fascination with other cultures and like the exoticism or how posh aspects of like in the BBC version of a British accent is the Oxford accent or the Cambridge one. And that's not to knock that. I just think there's a lot of beauty in American accents and the Western genre. So I wrote that for her. That was just like a fun little project that let me write a space Western. I experimented with some lit RPG because I have a lifelong history and love as a gamer. Those were really fun and easy to write. But urban fantasy is definitely like my premier passion apart from fantasy.
I see. I had a question and it just went away. This is what happens when you get in your 50s. This is where I'd say, Ro, save me, but he's not here. So let's see. You've written. When did you start writing?
What? Technically 18. I don't know if I really count that because like I was terrible. I had a really traumatic experience. It was self-inflicted, and I survived it. And I didn't know what to do with my life going into college because I knew, as I mentioned, I wasn't academically inclined in the same traditional ways. While I love mythology, I didn't think that could be a career. And this was 2008, so there were different crashes happening economically. I knew people older than me who were seniors when I was a freshman in high school, so they were graduating college just before I went in, and I saw what was going on with the college loan stuff, the level of debt accumulation. It was a really terrifying time because I didn't know where I fit in. What could I pursue that if I had to take a loan would equal money that I could pay it off, not ruin my life? I come from a very, very poor, ridiculously poor working class background. My dad was a cab driver. I've been blue collar most of my life, and I always actually treat the arts like a blue collar. Historically, the arts have always been by impoverished people who get a patron. Historically, if you look at it, as time went on, more privileged people got into the arts. But historically, it's been a very blue collar enterprise. Like the noir writers treated it like blue collar work who created the noir genre. You were paid by the word. You sit down, you do your job. But I started at 18, and I didn't publish until 23. That was about when self-publishing started getting viable. 22 was, by my age, 2012. That's when Kindle started happening. Hugh Howey, Amanda Hocking, Michael Sullivan, like that first wave of like the gold rush writers who were showing it's possible to do this had just happened. And in 2023, I was like, urban fantasy is dead traditionally. No one was publishing it unless they'd already started like in the 2000s, the early 2000s. Traditional was not buying any authors. And I felt, why would I waste my time querying for a genre that they don't want to support right now? Why don't I just self-publish, get it out there, and I'll cut my teeth and I'll just keep building? Because I know a lot of indie musician friends. I've seen the path with other careers where people just did it. They built themselves up. They taught themselves because this is a craft, which is what Jim Butcher has always said too. This is a craft. It's learnable. And that just kind of started me on the indie path. And nothing felt more right than when I did that. Everything in my life made sense. I've struggled with really bad depression, with suicidal ideation all my life. And when I started writing, it was the first time I genuinely actually felt like emotional happiness, which was a very big whiplash for somebody who most days is a very gray, a very quiet, still, silent day in your mind. People with depression have talked about this. Like sometimes you feel like you can't taste anything. Your days are colorless. So to feel like the extreme of happiness or just like this weird catharsis I didn't know how to quantify, kind of felt, and this gets very, spiritual hippie, but it felt right. Like writing just was a lot of joy to me. Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you, I started writing in 2017. I never, fantasized being a writer because that's what, those people do that have the special talents, and never considered that I could be one of them. And I started writing in 2017, and it was truly awful. The things I subjected people to read it's criminal. But and actually Haley Traveler I just published last week. That's what I started writing. I wrote it 7 times in a 2-year period, rewrote it.
Wow.
And then I was like, you know what? I'm ready to publish, just one more pass through, but I would need to freshen up. I'm going to see if I can write a fantasy story just because, the idea that I would sell books and anyone would want them was just crazy talk. So then I wrote 4 books in a fantasy series. So then I finally was like, okay, let's dust off Haley, see if it's even worth publishing. And it was still terrible. So I did another 6 rounds of editing through it, and I just published it last Friday. But yeah, and I mean, I never did I entertain the idea of me being a writer. I mean, that was, something those people do. That, I'm not one of them. I did not know about the blue collar roots because I always thought it was the privileged people that did all the writing, and like you, I was middle class. So yeah.
Historically, there's been more blue collar writers than privileged. I mean, you go back far enough in mythology, it gets arguable. There's this period where, yes, it was well educated people adding to it, contributing, in some cultures, sages. But before that, the history of storytelling is someone trying to rationalize the world and entertain around a campfire. Like, quite literally, society was formed around the campfire. Oral traditions preceding the written. It was normal. Like, a storyteller was actually a class of person that was a blue collar class. There's a great book for anybody watching who's interested in this called The Ibn Fadlan by Ibn Battuta. And he was the Marco Polo before Marco Polo. He traveled from the Middle East as a trader as far as Russia and the North, and met Vikings. And someone he employed with him was actually a storyteller, because by then, if you're a tradesman traveling the world, you can make a lot of money back then, where people were not isolated 100%, but rare goods are hard to come by. But a storyteller can break the ice. Meet a stranger, meet a nobleman. That's your entertainer, who can tell daring, amazing, cool stories from different cultures that person might not be aware of. They can break the ice. They can make it easier to facilitate negotiations. It's always been a blue collar craft by majority. I mean, we would not have the noir detective genre, and then because of that, cyberpunk and urban fantasy without Raymond Chandler. And that was a very blue collar era, the pulps, right? That's why they were called that. But like, these guys were churning out manuscripts and they treated it like a job, which is not to disrespect or to like be insensitive of people who don't do it that way. Cause like, life is hard. People have day jobs. There are people with illnesses who can't do this every day. I look at it more from the motivational aspect of, this is not a rare special talent. This is all learnable for anybody watching this at any point of their life. And people are just going to have different speeds of when they get where. There's also lucky career breaks that people don't like talking about, but they happen. The acceleration of where you reach wherever in your career is not connected to the ability to learn this and how fast you learn. But yeah, like, urban fantasy's roots are literally the detective noir genre. The early urban fantasies that we at least think of that got popular were investigator series in a contemporary fantasy setting that critique the same thing noir detective genres did. Noir detective genres usually had some kind of corrupt rich person. They were attacking the man or society at that point. They had societary commentary. Philip Marlowe was very, snarky, thumbed his nose up at powers and rich people. Harry Dresden does the same. And cyberpunk does that in a science fiction milieu, right? You have people against corporate powers, corrupt corporations, removal of civil liberty. It's just you change the setting of it, and then what do you decide to tackle? But a lot of genre niches is spun out of larger genres, and that goes back to some sort of pulp or storytelling blue collar tradition.
Okay, so normally it's Ro who does these, and we go off on talking about anything other than your book, and I have to bring us back. But I'm now doing both of our jobs, so I want to bring it back and actually talk about your book, because ostensibly that's why you're here.
Right? Yeah.
So tell us about your main character. Tell us a little bit more about the book. I mean, I love the mythology part. You got me sold. I'm going to read it. And it's not just because it's not Tim McKay's book. But anyway, tell us about your character. Ari is the main character, yes?
Yeah. So in the present day, he's operating under the guise as just the storyteller. He is effectively the world's best, biggest, and he's so good and known at his job that he's He subsumed the title of storyteller for himself. However, you learn through interactions with a songstress and a dancer that he's slowly maybe starting to fall for, that he's perhaps also the greatest legend or villain in the world from all these legendary stories that were similarly, like we talked about, co-opted by the fictional cultures I use. Everybody has their riff on his story, and they've all turned it to something else. She figures out it's all him, likely. She wants the truth. So as they're sort of navigating the present day scenario, both his goals and hers, he's telling her the story of how he came to be and became what everyone thinks he is. And then it's going to go into a little bit of subversions of his myths and legends, along with the truths and the lies and how they all spun to where they are now.
Oh, that is awesome. I have to pick this book up and start reading it. I do want to say, just tell people that I did ask, and you did send me a book. This is for the USO. Because I volunteered there. They gave me a shelf to put self-pub and traditional pub in this case, books for the troops. And I got 220 last year, and we have run out. So we're going to, Ro and I are going to start up another fund where we try to ask for books. And Ro worked for the VA for a dozen years, I think. So we want to try to include the VA as well. So thank you for this. This will be going in this weekend to the Richmond Airport USO. So I appreciate that. I'd mentioned before, are you ready to go into the Bald Dome?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to get my prop, my dice tower. So here's what's happened. Ari has been transported to a magical, mystical place where I will roll a die and tell you what it is. He will get one potion that he does not know what it does, and he will get to choose between a regular item or a weapon. If he chooses a regular item, he will face a regular animal. If he chooses a weapon, he will face a fantasy creature. Your call. And after we set this all up, you are the storyteller, so you get to tell us what happens in this encounter.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so first off, a 20. Ari has been transported to a sacred temple guarded by fierce beasts. And ChatGPT did not get more specific than that, so sorry. He has a potion, which is number 2, which means nothing to you, but I know what it is. So now the choice is, does he want the regular item or does he want the weapon? And I don't tell you what it is until after you choose.
Being who he is, he would pick the regular item because while he's familiar with weapons, that's not necessarily who he is. Like, this is a fantasy that doesn't rely necessarily on tons of violence. Like, it's not that violence doesn't happen.
Right.
But weapons they are an escalator, right? Like, if you go back to the Homer quote, the sword itself incites, or the blade itself incites men to violence. He's going to choose the regular item, whatever that may be.
Okay. Well, he could have had a crossbow, but instead he is now going to get a cooking pot.
That's fine.
And he will now face an animal, which you did not choose the fantasy creature, which
bunny rabbit,
which would have been a ghoul. Instead, you got a number 10, which is a Nile crocodile. So you're in this mystical temple. There's a crocodile in there. You have a cooking pot and a potion that you don't know what it does. What happens in this story?
Is the crocodile doing anything to Ari, or is it just sitting there chill?
For the sake of the story, we're going to say that there's like a pond in there, and Ari is right next to the pond. We have to force, conflict to happen.
Does it have to be conflict? Because that's not going to be his first move.
And you are telling the story, so tell us what happens.
Ari's probably going to take some water from the body of water in the pot and try to kindle a fire to boil water to have something clean and safe to drink. And I guess if the crocodile tries to start something, there's 2 options for him. He could bonk it on the nose of the pot and try to deter it, and that does work on crocodiles. Their snouts are very, very susceptible to being bonked. There's a lot of senses, a lot of nerve endings they've got going on there, given how sensitive that is. But this is something canonical in the story. Ari has an uncanny ability to connect with animals and sort of understand them on a quiet level. It'd be wrong to say communicate, but it's something I have established in the series so far, that he has developed the ability to sort of understand the story of people and things, which gives him some sort of insight. And he's been granted at times a a better, quieter connection. Like animals act differently around him. It's not like the Force; you can't control them. I think you're gonna unfortunately get a boring story of Ari just having to heat up water, which is not exciting, but it does tie into the theme of the story that I'm writing. That and this is the line very often iterated. That is, everything and everyone has a story, and I'm paraphrasing, which is why I said iteration because there's multiple versions of it. But the theme is that everything in the world has a story. That story is important. There is value to that, and it's worth taking the time to understand something's story. And in this case, too, Ari would probably sit and watch the crocodile unless something happens that forces him into a position of being on the defensive. But if not, he could perfectly sit there with a dangerous animal and be fine. Again, that's something that I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read book one, but there's a scenario that better explains this in the first book.
Okay. You know, when I first started this, I told people, no, they have to fight. And since then, I just said, no, it's your story. Tell us what I like it so much better now that it's like, because otherwise it's just very one note and okay, well, I have to fight. So I like the idea of, you know, maybe your guy fights, maybe in your case, he's like, you know what, he's the crocodile whisperer and he can just, you know.
Yeah, more than anything, he would probably try to wonder why is there a crocodile in the temple and try to understand the story of the temple. If crocodiles are connected to it, if there's some great story, though for that he would probably try to find someone in the temple. That is something that is the theme of the story of Ari asking for the story of things. When I do personalize the book to people, because like I brought up with depression and the suicidal ideation, I've attempted to take my life, and it's part of the underpinning message that everybody has a story. So if I have time to personalize the book, one of the quotes I put in that is that everybody's stories matter, including yours. Just so everybody who gets a physical copy understands that and has that there. It's thematic to the book. It's also something I vehemently believe in real life, and I try to take the time to remind people of that because the book is not removed from socio-political bad stuff happening in the present day. And there's reasons for that, but that's not any dissimilar from our world. And I know that can make people feel small, insignificant, and life is really hard. And fiction at its root has been entertainment and escapism, right? Like we can dress it up as much as we want and try to be, you know, like literary jack-offs about it. But at the end of the day, our job as a storyteller is to entertain and to offer escapism. That has historically been the tradition. And through that lens, I want to make sure that people realize like that's okay, that escapism, and that they also matter as much as the books that they're reading, because it is a two-way street, right? The story does not exist without a storyteller, and everybody is a storyteller. The reason stories work is because people have had a breadth of experience, whatever that is, and so have authors. And what we're doing is just speaking a language that doesn't really get credit among normal languages. We're speaking to experience, right? Which is why if you write a death scene, people most often have some familiarity with death at some part of their life, even if it's not directly. They understand grief. It may not be the same scenario of grief you caused, but they understand what grief is. You're giving them an emotional catharsis and roller coaster, trying to offer them some kind of surcease, reprieve, or emotional confrontation, right? Like every genre does that. Horror allows someone to safely explore horrible circumstances, and they know they'll be okay with it. Thriller allows a person to experience hypercompetency. Most thriller protagonists are really good, like Jack Reacher, right? He's 6'97", drinks black coffee, and can kick everyone's butt by just glaring at them, right? Like windows explode around Jack Reacher. I'm not being hyperbolic about it, but like that's the idea, and that's what Jack Reacher does. You read Jack Reacher, you feel like a badass because he's one. Fantasy is the exact same thing. Every genre has its quiet, unspoken promise that you're supposed to fulfill, which is why people get mad if you don't fulfill it. And that's what leads to a bad review. It's more more often not a disconnect of what you promised to what that reader wanted and its taste, right? But we're all in the escapism and the catharsis trade. And through that, if we can add a little bit of making the reader feel special back, I think that's important, which is why this series is so story-centric as well. Not just the mythological stuff that I love, but I believe there's other aspects of storytelling that don't get talked about. And it's the relationship between storyteller and reader, which I do get into in this book or the series.
So how much of Ari is really Ronnie? Is there a lot of human Ari, or is it more you just chose a different person, a different persona?
No, there's definitely some of me in there in terms of some stuff I'm doing either social commentary on or some of the trauma he's been through. Like I discussed depression, even though they have therapy, I do have a lot of neurodivergent characters in there. Ari does have depression especially in the present day. His adult form has struggles with depression and PTSD. And people will pick up on that. People who are neurodivergent want to see themselves represented. There are characters with generalized anxiety disorder for people who will, pick up on that. One character has dissociative identity disorder that's exacerbated by his own magic. But for Ari, some of his life events mirror mine. So Ari grows up in a theater. He wants to be a performer, and prior to writing, what my first love was acting. Obviously, another form of storytelling, and I was unfortunately unable to pursue that. And something similar happens to Ari. Ari never gets to pursue that in his youth. And a lot of things with his connections to animals. Animals are extremely important to Ari. He ends up rescuing one. Spoilers, not spoilers. And I grew up into a very rough childhood with a lot of abusive, dangerous circumstances. And Ari has a similar childhood path, and he connects to animals for similar reasons that I did. Animals are also something that saved my life. In terms of at least having something to bond with, a relationship character where there's only just pure unrequited, not unrequited, but just pure unconditional love. Yeah. And a lot of his core emotional beats, I would say, definitely come from me. Some obviously fantastical drama-sized versions of his life, yeah, but he's not a one-to-one of me. For one thing, he's almost, I don't want to say a pyromaniac because he's not, but he's been involved in situations that would lend the idea that he's a pyromaniac or an arsonist, and I most certainly am not.
Don't want to admit anything on, recordable media. Got it. Okay. So how old is Ari? Is he just like a 50-year-old man, or is he 4,000 years old, or what is
that? I haven't explained intentionally, and I do leave clues for readers because in the past story, I do mention his age once, and I tell how much time passes between certain acts of the story so people can figure that out. And I give enough hints about his present day experience, the way he looks, how he comes off. I haven't given all that away, because if I wanted readers to know, I would tell them. And again, given the breadth of the legends and stuff he's accomplished and certain things that happen in future novels, I don't want to spoil that for no reason just yet. I'll wait for readers to figure it out. And I've been very fortunate that the series has been picking up a lot of smart, intelligent readers. So that it's been really cool to see.
Awesome. My other question is, what would you consider this? This is not a grimdark story, I'm guessing. No.
There are definitely tragic moments. I liken it more to a Greek tragedy, even though it's not Greek. Just that's the most famous, iconic comparison, and it's definitely more in the lens of a heroic or mythic fantasy. Mythic being in the sense Tolkien identified his as that because it follows the vein of a lot of classic mythology. Tolkien used this ring, the Nibelung, which is the ring of power. It's I believe a Danish play, and these are all based off of Finnish and Norse myths. The amount of Beowulf that is in The Hobbit is a lot. Smaug is quite literally Fafnir, including the death of Smaug. And Lord of the Rings draws from this famous story about essentially a ring of power. Only it wasn't made by Sauron in the original myth. It was dwarves made the magic ring that could give you dominion to rule the world. And I'm obviously crushing and leaning on a lot of comparative mythology, so multiple culture myths that I'm distilling, and then some meta-referential beats to modern fantasy, because my hope was that by using some referential stuff, I can sort of dial it back and show it doesn't just exist here in this work of fiction or just in this mythology. It exists in XYZ cultures if you go with me along this journey in Ari. So it's made it hard because it lends itself to mythology and an older form of storytelling. My structure literally comes from the South Asian epics. The South Asian epics were the first to create the frame narrative structure. And I go really deep in nesting stories. At some point, you have the past storyline, which is a nesting story of itself, and the nesting stories inside that. And you might have a character telling a nesting story inside of a nesting story. So it gets very Russian nesting doll if you want to use a more common comparison. And that I haven't known how to quantify it. Essentially, I just go with epic fantasy at this point because that's what Tor does. And it's easy marketing, right? What I just said is not marketable. That's great for the nerd for me, but nobody cares. A bookstore seller is not going to put those qualifiers. This is a heroic mythic fantasy that's a picaresque, a travelogue full of nesting stories, and it's meta-referential. They're going to go, it's epic fantasy.
Yeah, they don't have a shelf for that.
Yeah. Silk Road fantasy, maybe, but.
So the one thing when we had JCM Byrne on here and we asked him, what is your story? What would you classify? He goes, oh, I don't know. That's why I publish it. People review it, and some people say it's a slice of life. Some people say it's life. He's like, I don't know what it is, so I publish it, and a lot of smart people read it and leave reviews, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it was. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I have no desire to ever be traditionally published because I'm not really trying to make money at this. The idea that people want to read my stories is still alien to me. So I don't.
Well, I mean, it shouldn't be for what it's worth. Like, I may have failed math, but like, there's one thing I can do, which is break down. There's 8 billion people in the world. So the idea that there's not even 1 million people who want your story is kind of crazy, because that's saying that each person is so individually unique, and our tastes are so embedded only in us that we have no similar tastes, that nobody else could like your story. That's not true. From a sheer math point, there's probably 1 million people at the very least who would love exactly what you're doing. But obviously the hard part is, how do you market and find them, right? And that's just.
I was going to say, thanks. You're saying my marketing sucks. Got it. I don't disagree.
I was saying marketing is hard, but not yours sucks. I haven't found 1 million readers yet either, but like I have to believe they're out there, right? Like, nothing I love is so unique to me, right? Like, I'm a product of my environment and what I was exposed to, and then what I chose to go out and expose myself to, which is poor phrasing in a way, but you know what I mean.
Yep. And EL wants to know about the painting on your wall next to the light switch that we can only see just a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Maybe I can just lift this up somehow. So that's a specific piece of. How do I do this? This is hard on my phone. That's Daredevil. That's an iteration of Daredevil that I got from artists, because when I go to conventions, since I write, and I'm obviously a writer, not an artist, I try to buy and support other artists from other mediums. So it goes a really beautiful Daredevil piece that somebody painted. Supergirl, Black Panther, Red Sonja. Then above, it's all Star Wars collectors posters. Like, I have an authentic Empire Strikes Back mini. It's like 8 by 11.5 or something. Revenge of the Sith, and then the artwork of Vader, and then my whole office is just all that. Like, the top is Bat Family, a crossover between Batman and Spider-Man 2099, Spidey Gwen, Black Widow, Deadpool and Harley Quinn, and then there's Buffy stuff, Firefly. Like, I just buy artist art. It's the one thing I collect.
So I will tell you, I got lucky, and this sword right here, the Roman Gladius, the guy across from me at a Comic-Con and goes, hey, I'll trade you any sword for all 4 of your books in hardback.
Wow.
And so I was like, deal. So yeah, that's what started my weapon collection. Is I got that for free.
Yeah, but you're a fantasy writer, right? You need a sword. Like, most need at least one sword.
I mean, how can you call yourself a fantasy writer and not have a weapon collection? I mean, so let's see. I almost feel bad, but would you willing to answer a silly question?
Sure.
Okay, number 10. 2-part question. What is your favorite holiday and why? And the second part, so actually 3 parts, is how would the presence of your main character change that?
Okay, first part, and this is good. It's kind of it's hard because they both revolve around people and food. Either 4th of July or Christmas, for 2 different reasons. Because 4th of July was like one of the nice parts of my childhood where we got together as a family, and because I lived by Washington, D.C., we would go out to the Potomac. And you can sit, and for people who don't know, there are these beautiful banks right across the Washington Monument, and you can sit on these hills. And people get there hours early before like nighttime, right, in summer. And there's just kids and parents everywhere, cookouts going, people bring their own food, everyone plays, kids are playing together, especially before modern times where I guess, like, I don't know, people have gotten more sticklery about that. But kids would just wander off, right? And you meet other kids, you play sparklers and stuff, barbecue and cookouts, which I love cooking food. It's a love language for me, and connecting with people. And then there's a huge fireworks show at night, right? It gets dim. Everyone goes back to their part on the little hill. The Potomac River goes through Washington Monument, and then just like the government just blows up the sky for hours. And it was like a magical time in my life where like those nights, everything felt like it would be okay. And the other is Christmas, because I've never had one, but I've always loved the idea of it. Not even with the religious association, just the idea of the happiness, the idea of giving, like just giving to friends and the kindness that goes with it. Not even the idea of the presents, just the giving nature, right? The whole jolly festiveness. I've tried to go out with friends just for good food around that time of the year. The appreciation and the gratitude. Um, and if Ari were there, I don't think he would change it much, except for the fact that he would love the chance to perform genuinely for people. It would be an addition. He would be able to actually entertain more, right? Which is a form of entertainment I actually enjoy the older I get. I don't want to celebrate my 4th of July with a TV going, even outside or a movie marathon. I want friends talking. I want people trading fun life stories or anecdotes, or like a no shit there I was moment, or like it's great, like you remember this time whenever. I don't know if that's just me, if it's a societal zeitgeist thing happening as the world gets crazier, or I'm just getting old. Maybe a combination. But yeah, that's the answers to that.
So I have to ask you a question, and I'm hoping that no one else is paying attention during the video part of this, because in 2026, the U.S. is going to turn 250 years old. And I promised myself about 15 years ago that I was going to be in Washington, D.C. on July 4th, 2026 for the 250th anniversary. So don't tell anyone else, just me. Where should I go to see the fireworks on that day? And how crazy is it going to be?
Oh, crazy. Oh, man. Well, if you get there early enough, you'll be fine. The problem is leaving. It could be a 2 to 4 hour drive just to get back to like some parts of middle Virginia because of traffic. But you can usually go to the bank right across the Washington Monument, and the river cuts right through it. You're looking right at it, like you're a stone's throw from the Washington Monument. You could hurl a stone and hit it. Not that you ever should. And that's where we always went as kids, and that's just the best view because they try to do it intentionally for that reason, where the display usually frames the Washington Monument. You have fireworks going up over it, on the sides of it, and then like a huge, like just a span lengthwise. And again, I still think this is true to this day. I haven't been unfortunately able to go after growing up much, but people still bring little, George Foreman grills and your little Weber grill, and people will still cook out and they'll do stuff, and that's always been just that's ingrained in my just psyche at this point. Like the smell of charcoal and barbecue for 4th of July with the Washington Monument, and this was back when I'm sure someone far more intelligent than me who understands like bug habits and what's been going on there, but there used to be a lot more fireflies when I was a kid. I don't understand what's been going on with them, like the way people argue bees have been declining. I'm very ignorant on, I guess, the nature of what's been happening with fireflies, but I haven't seen as much every summer. But when I was a kid, fireflies used to light up the skies all the time in Virginia, all the time, every day, every evening, and including 4th of July in front of the Washington Monument. And that added to it. And that was just another layer of beauty. Like when all the people stopped their own little fireworks, not to distract from the Washington Monument show, there's a moment where it was just like all fireflies everywhere. These little beautiful, just amberdine and golden little motes, just, it's like being in the Studio Ghibli movie or something. And I think that's the one thing gone from that right now. Like I didn't see any fireflies this summer at all.
I'm with you. I saw a million when I grew up, in the 70s in Kentucky, and I think I've seen 4 this summer.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Now I don't look out my window that often at night because I'm not a peeping Tom. Everyone. I was
anyway. Like, what goes on where you live at night? Okay, that's fair.
But I have to go get my dog before he kills possums because that's what he likes to do for fun. But yeah, I've seen very few. I will tell you, I've been trying now for 7 years. They have a lottery in the Great Smoky Mountains. They have fireflies, and it's a certain strainer where they all light up at the same time at night. So it's all dark, and then all of a sudden you're surrounded by thousands of them. And they have a lottery you have to enter. I think it's end of April is when the lottery is, and it's for like middle of May to middle of June. But it's the synchronous fireflies are what they're called. They have some in Pennsylvania, and they have some in South Carolina. But I've been entering these lotteries because there's like 65 parking spots. So you have to get one of those, and it's for a period. So I've been entering for 7 years, and I have not yet won, but I am still trying. But yes, that is one of my bucket list things that I want to do. So if you're a firefly aficionado like me, not just the show but also the insect, highly I can't wait to do that. I'm saying highly recommend it, but I've never gone. And the other thing is, I'll be seeing you in 2026. We'll go have some good food or something, then we'll go watch the fireworks.
Sounds great.
And what I've learned from this is that I need to get a hotel and not try to drive back.
That hasn't changed because the influx to the area has only grown, mostly because of the economy, which being in Virginia, you're aware of. Like Northern Virginia, DC, and Maryland have quickly accumulated the 5 richest counties in the country per average household income. So it's not like billionaires everywhere, although to be honest, there are those guys hiding out everywhere. But the average income here has gone ridiculously up ever since 9/11, I believe, because of, like the government infrastructure, the investment that's gone in there, and then the affiliating tech industry that's gone up with that. Because like I think Virginia is now home to the most data centers in the country for a state, and that's obviously good for the job market. But then people have been pissed because I think the data centers, like the theory is that they're like loud at night or something, that they disturb the wildlife. I haven't looked into the science of it, and where I'm at, that's not an issue. But I know, yeah, there's just more people here, more traffic.
Yeah, I know. I'm 12 miles south of Richmond,
Mhm.
and the real estate market is crazy because people in
Yeah.
DC built homes north of Richmond, and they're moving south of Richmond now because so when I go to sell my house, I'm going to sell it for way more than it's worth because
Yeah, that's my parents' situation. They bought their home for 180,000 in 2000, and without being renovated, it's still the original home it was from the 60s. It's still that home. It's 800 something thousand.
wow, yeah,
Yeah.
My-
That's an 8x multiplier in housing prices, which is wild. And people are buying them, which is staggering. I'm seeing new people move into like my folks' neighborhood all the time, buying these tiny little starter homes for nearly $1 million. And I'm like, there's something wrong here. That ain't right. You shouldn't have to pay that, and these should not be that cost.
yeah. I think my house has doubled. I've had it since 2002. It was 130, and now it's 100 or 265. And I figured wait a couple more years.
This is what's terrifying. That sounds like affordable to me. That sounds like that's not a bad price for a house in this market. And you're like, it doubled. And I'm from Nova, so I'm like, wow, that's 1/4 the price of a normal house here. That sounds cheap. Which is why, again, like you said, people are moving from where I'm at.
Yeah. Well,
Oh my God.
3-bedroom, 2-bath.
Yeah.
So
the homes here that are selling for that are 2-bedroom, 1-bath that are selling for nearly $1 million up here.
Yeah. So I figure, a couple more years when they buy all the homes in like Hanover and they have to move south of Richmond. I'm like, I should be able to make a penny on my home when I sell it. So
I was born in the wrong era. I really screwed up. my big mistake.
About that.
Yeah, I know, but I still like to be able to.
Oh, so
that was the quiet cry for every millennial watcher right now.
Oh yes, I have people. We have one coworker. I'll just tell you one story. She's the nicest person, but she kind of loses touch with reality. And she was telling people who, this is their first job. They've been at the job like a year and a half, and she's like, "Oh, just put $1,000 away in savings every month, and you'll have time for money for your, down payment in no time." And they're like, "You think I can put away $1,000?"
Yeah.
She's
just like the cost of living has gone up in multiples across the range, whether it's food, insurance, bills, and then housing. But the wage has not gone up commensurately. It has not been a 1-to-1. Yeah, that's not how that works.
So I mean, she tells them that, and I'm like, I was proud of you. You did not have any big reaction to that. You didn't laugh at her or cuss at her. I mean, you just thanks for that. I'll consider that.
Yep. I think a down payment here is like, well, what's the average down payment? It's usually 20%. So up here for $800,000 house, that's a $200,000 down payment. That's the price of a house somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. But the problem is like if you work here, where are you gonna go?
Right. So let's see, Ronnie, when your first book, the first binding is out. I have that. Mm-hmm. Do you have a copy of your second book to show people?
I actually don't. I'm supposed to be getting them in theory soon. I was told next 48 hours a day ago, so maybe tomorrow. We'll see. But yeah, the Doors of Midnight covers up everywhere online. I'm really happy about it. It's utterly beautiful. It features an eclipse on there, so it's perfect that it came out this year, the year of the eclipse, because I am tackling just very lightly, at least the physical rumors and appearance of like eclipse mythology. I don't go too much into it in the second book first. I'm going to keep expanding, but Eclipse mythology is another universal myth that a lot of people have, reasons for and what an eclipse means.
Yeah.
And it was really nice to be able to have that on the cover for book 2. So I'm really happy.
So I've seen 3 eclipses live where I was in
Oh,
the
wow.
path of totality. So yeah, I have to read your series because everything I like, it seems like, is in your books. So
Thank you.
so yeah, I am excited. Sorry, Tim, but I'm going to get your book on audio and I'm going to start listening to it. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
is there any question that I should have asked you that I did not because I'm a lousy host?
Oh, no, I know you're wonderful. I can't think of anything. The only thing I could think of is because this has been we focus also on like the wonderful stuff of indie authors and that aspect of the community. If I could take a moment to plug an indie bookstore, because they've always been so lovely and supportive of me as well as indie author friends. And when I was also indie, I just didn't know as much about them then. But for anyone in the U.S. Wanting signed copies, there's a beautiful bookstore in Washington D.C. called Loyalty Books, and they are fulfilling pre-orders for signed copies. I'm actually going to be going there the Monday of the launch week, or before launch week, and I will be signing copies for everybody who orders from them. So you'll get like a signed copy of a book 2's hardcover if you want.
Awesome.
And they're just going to fulfill that. Yeah, they'll ship them out.
This is local talk for Virginians here, but there's a store, I think it's Books, Beads, and Beyond in Tappahannock. They do author signings all the time with indie authors or traditional. I don't think they care. And they actually, I've had several people, authors I know, have gone there and they say they really publicize it a lot and they pull people in.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. So, I actually might be down there. A friend of mine has a beautiful cabin. That's next to Northern Neck, right? It's like the same area.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because it's around there, a beautiful cabin on a lake, and she's let me use it for writing vacations. Although unfortunately, it's never been to recover. I have always been on deadline historically for a Tales of Terrain book, and I will be there again on deadline writing book 3. But I might be able to at least go there and get out during the morning and do something nice for the local community there, and hopefully give back to an indie bookstore and participate. So I would love to do that and support another store.
So I told myself I was going to do it this year, and I have not contacted them yet because I do other things instead. Right. But yeah, I've heard nothing but great things about them. I know they do not do signings between January and March because they're afraid of ice storms or something. I don't know, but
that makes sense.
Yeah. 9 months out of the year they will actually do it. So you just need to call them, and you'll probably need to give them like a month's notice or more.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm going to actually write that down as something I have to do for me now that I kept saying, well, once I publish Haley, I'll have time for it. So I published Haley.
Right. Yeah.
Excuses. So yeah, but I would look into them. It's just, I mean, a way you can sell some books, like you said, give back to the community. I would look into that.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll definitely follow up and email you about that because I already forgot the name, but that's ADHD.
Yeah, and sorry all the people who don't live in Virginia and this means nothing to you, but it's the end of the interview, so we're allowed. Okay, well, Ronnie, is there anything else you want to tell people? I love your book, wow. The storyteller, everybody has a story. I think is wonderful. All the mythology I love. You mentioned Eclipse. You could not have checked more boxes for me. But anything else?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody, whoever came out, and everybody who sees us at some point, even later, because I've been really fortunate in the first book has done really well in terms of its contract. It's actually out-earned itself in 4 months, and it's already earning into book 2. And that has specifically been because of people like you and the people watching, the word of mouth outside of the internet. And then by that, I mean like the professional marketing spheres versus like people who take the time to review books like what you do and share. And the people who watch you, that's actually been the largest difference in success of the series. So it's been wonderfully like beautiful and circular in a way of like me talking about stories, and the actual people that stories are for have been the most instrumental so far in the series succeeding. Not like massive marketing pushes or stuff like that. It's been just grassroots and people who just genuinely care and are kind enough to recommend it to people. So I just would like to thank everybody here and who eventually sees this.
Okay, well, you can thank me by writing the book about how mythical creatures all started. That's all I ask.
Yeah, that one will happen depending on how much Thor offers to pay me for it.
Fair. Well, Ronnie, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
it is time to wave awkwardly and wait for the StreamYard to finally let us leave. Thanks, everybody, for coming and watching.